Не переживайте, буде для них запис, все буде нормально. Також хочу розповісти про правила. В нас, на жаль, сьогодні дуже багато, ми не зможемо вас підключати для озвучування ваших запитань, тому просимо ваші запитання писати в чаті, я це все буду читати. І в кінці буду нашим колегам озвучувати ті запитання, ви зможете отримати на них відповідь. Просимо вас не вмикати звук, щоб не заважати один одному. Також в нас сьогодні буде переклад, бо, як ви бачите, наші колеги, вони з Великої Британії, будуть розмовляти англійською мовою. Але ж внизу в лінійці у вас є такий глобус, на якому написано «переклад». Не дивуйтеся, вам треба обрати іспанську мову. Нема в зумі української мови, тому обирайте сміло іспанську, будете чути українську. Так, що ще мені вам потрібно сказати? Про питання я вам сказала. Після заходу ви також отримуєте додаткові матеріали від наших колег з посиланнями на матеріали. В принципі, мені здається, з організаційних питань в нас все, тому ви можете, якщо ще якісь питання ми не проговорили організаційно, писати їх в чаті, знайомитися один з одним. І загалом я хочу сказати, що тема захисту дітей в інтернеті стала особливо актуальною під час карантину та онлайн-навчання. Я думаю, багато з вас, хто здикнувся з новітніми ризиками під час переходу до ізоляції, самоізоляції. Разом із тим ми розуміємо, що ризики постійно еволюціонують, злочинці знаходять нові варіанти скоєння злочинів, і навіть діти не завжди встигають за тим, щоб розуміти, які небезпеки є від тих технологій, а ще більше виклики це бросають для батьків, для спеціалістів. Саме з цією метою ми почали цю роботу в Україні і будемо запускати в вересні. Дуже хочу подякувати нашій колезі Ольгі Холомєєвій, директору рядового центру, що в вересні ми будемо запускати консультаційну лінію для дітей, батьків та спеціалістів щодо безпеки дітей в інтернеті. Хочу дуже подякувати всім нашим колегам і бажаю нам сьогодні успішного, цікавого і легкого з технічної точки зору вебінару. І передаю слово, зараз подивлюся, чи вже до нас приєднався уповноважений з прав дитини. Вікторія, скажіть мені, будь ласка, чи уповноважений в нас вже є, і ми можемо надавати йому слово? Чекаємо відповідь від Вікторії. Одну хвилинку.
Доброго дня.
Супер.
Да, дякую, Настя. Я вітаю кожного учасника, який приєднався, які ще приєднаються. Ті, хто, можливо, згодом будуть дивитися цей круглий стіл. Хочу нагадати, що це вже другий вебінар, їх буде всього 7. І ця тема дуже важлива. Можливо, в когось з'явиться питання, чому саме зараз, і чому цілих 7 вебінарів на цю тему. Я думаю, що батькам, які мають дітей і які мають доступ до інтернету, це більш зрозуміло, і фахівцям, які з цим працюють, тому що, на жаль, інтернет сьогодні в усьому світі не є безпечним місцем для дітей. Ми б так хотіли, але, на жаль, злочинці все більше і більше переходять в мережу інтернет, все більше намагаються досягнути дітей, і ви знаєте, що ми на конференціях міжнародних чуємо дуже багато інформації при відвідуванні інших країн про те, що все більше караються злочинці, які навіть за сексуальне насильство по відношенню до дітей, яке було скоєно в мережі інтернет. Нам, звісно, треба трошки попрацювати в нашій країні, щоб удосконалити її законодавство, і, відповідно, ті установи, які працюють з дітьми, могли більш якісно працювати, щоб захищати, попереджувати це насильство, якщо воно відбувається, то захищати дитиною в процесі розслідувань і надавати послуги з реабілітації дитини. Тому ми і сьогодні в цьому напрямку досить серйозно працюємо з усіма стейкхолдерами, використовуючи міжнародний досвід для того, щоб максимально захистити наших дітей. І насамперед хочу подякувати нашим партнерам, які допомогли нам в організації цього заходу. Це і Абаролі Ukraine, і Stop Sexting проект, і служба порятунку дітей, а також урядовий контактний центр. Сьогодні буде, сподіваюсь, дуже цікавий вебінар на тему консультаційні послуги, зокрема онлайн, для дітей, батьків та спеціалістів щодо безпеки в інтернеті. Хочу трошки дати статистики. Буквально в минулому році ми проводили онлайн-опитування разом з Міжнародним союзом електрозв'язку, і в дослідженні приймало участь понад 11 тисяч респондентів. Так от, за цією статистикою, понад 90% дітей в Україні до 12 років вже мають доступ до інтернету. 60% підлітків готові зустрітися з онлайн-другом, котрим може бути людина, яку вони взагалі ніколи не бачили і не знають. Як ви знаєте, що досить часто та фотографія, яка розміщена в інтернеті, не відповідає дійсності. І, знову ж таки, дослідження, які проводились, показують, що дитині достатньо якихось там 15-20 хвилин спілкування онлайн для того, щоб вже довіритися цій людині і піти на зустріч з цією людиною. І ми знаємо навіть ті гучні злочини, які вже відбуваються в Україні, про які писали засоби масової інформації, коли діти постраждали, це або було вбивство, або сексуальне насильство дітей, після того, як дитина познайомилася з злочинцем в інтернеті. І останній випадок – це була дитина, дівчинка 9 років. Тому вік дітей, які вільно комунікують через інтернет, в усьому світі зменшується. Далі, 67% дітей бачили онлайн те, що їх дуже засмутило. 24% батьків зазначають, що їхнім дітям доводилося зустрічатися з проблемами в інтернеті. А 80% батьків, вони при виникненні такої проблеми не знають, куди б можна було б звернутися і повідомити про цю проблему. Така невтішна статистика, але якраз для цього ми і намагаємося проводити такі заходи, щоб якомога більше людей могло долучитися і опанувати якісь нові знання, найкращий досвід світовий. Ось тому ми і запросили сьогодні до нашого круглого столу Венді Робінсона, керівника консультаційної лінії для дітей NSPCC Children, та Кармел Глесбрук, представник гарячої консультаційної лінії для фахівців. Вони якраз і поділяться міжнародним досвідом, і я думаю, що це буде досить цікаво. Є дуже багато ще статистики, ми на кожному вебінарі будемо цією статистикою ділитися, і знову ж таки, я дуже хотів, щоб ці вебінари максимально могли вам допомогти, тому ми і звертаємось сьогодні до найкращих в світі фахівців, які мають власний досвід, досить великий, для того, щоб ми могли разом з вами його опановувати і максимально ефективно захищати наших дітей. Дякую вам дуже і продовжуємо.
Дуже вам дякую, Микола Миколайович, за таке вітальне слово. Жахаюча насправді статистика, яку ви озвучили, і я сподіваюся, що з кожним, не то що роком, з кожним днем ці цифри щодо злочинів проти дітей в інтернеті будуть все менше і менше, тому що насправді кожного дня ми докладаємо шалені зусилля, щоб ця система працювала в нас ще краще. Тому зараз я хочу передати слово нашому партнеру Ользі Холомєєвій, яка є директором урядового контакт-центру. Ольга, передаю слово вам. Якщо можете, вімкніть, будь ласка, також відео, щоб ми вас бачили.
Доброго дня, колеги. На жаль, відео я не зможу включити, тільки аудіозв'язок. Вітаю всіх учасників круглого столу. Дякую, Анастасія, за запрошення до цього цікавого і дуже важливого заходу. Мені приємно, що урядовий контактний центр за вашим запрошенням бере участь в цьому заході, і ми знаємо, що інтернет – це дуже важлива на сьогодні складова життя і в роботі, і у відпочинку, і дуже багато взагалі громадян, і в тому числі дітей, долучається до роботи в мережі. І, на жаль, безпека дітей в інтернеті, вона залишає, як то кажуть, бажати кращого. Незважаючи на досить позитивну роль інтернету в нашому житті, тим не менше, перед нами є великі виклики, які постають перед усіма громадянами, і в першу чергу ми маємо захистити своїх дітей від тієї небезпеки, яка чекає їх у мережі. Буквально декілька слів стосовно нашої установи. Наша установа, державна установа, урядовий контактний центр, працює вже 11 років. Ми приймаємо звернення, які надходять на урядову гарячу лінію, і в телефонному зв'язку, і електронними засобами, це і з веб-сайту офіційного інтернет-представництва Президента України, і з урядового порталу, і з сайту безпосередньо нашої установи. Тому більше мільйона звернень в рік оформлюється від запитувачів. З листопада 2019 року наша установа у співпраці з секретаріатом Кабінету міністрів України, з органами виконавчої влади, стала учасниками експериментального проєкту зі створення єдиного входу опрацювання звернень громадян. Це в тому числі і від осіб, які постраждали від торгівлі людьми, домашнього насильства, насильства за ознакою статі, насильства стосовно дітей або про загрозу вчинення такого насильства. Завданням цієї частини проєкту є забезпечення дієвого та ефективного захисту громадян в усіх випадках насильства. За час роботи робота цієї лінії стартувала з 11 лютого вже цього року. За цей час не так багато звернень надійшло, але тим не менше понад 6 тисяч звернень, які надійшли на гарячу лінію 1547, вибачте. При цьому понад 22% постраждалих осіб є звернення, понад 22% це учасниками, тобто постраждалими є діти. Це не зовсім, як то кажуть, накладається на історію з безпекою в мережі, але тим не менше ми бачимо, що є досить багато кривдників і в реальному житті, і ми розуміємо, що прояви насильства, переслідування, погрози досить часто виникають саме в мережі і із застосуванням телефонів, соціальних мереж тощо. У випадку, коли такі матеріали оприлюднюються або стає відомо про них, діти страждають найбільше. Тому для того, щоб виправити цю ситуацію, для того, щоб надати якусь роз'яснювальну інформацію, ми і запропонували свою допомогу у створенні спеціалізованої лінії. На сьогодні в нас спеціалізованих ліній працює вже 11. Це і лінія допомоги особам з інвалідністю, і лінії для забезпечення інформацією абітурієнтів з тимчасово окупованих територій тощо, і багато таких ліній ще. В лінії, про яку я вже розповідала, з попередження домашнього насильства та протидії торгівлі людьми і домашньому насиллю, в тому числі насиллю над дітьми, працюють професійні психологи та юристи, які пройшли навчання і були проведені семінари на тему «Школа підготовки консультантів гарячих ліній» саме з попередження домашнього насилля. За участю представників Фонду народонаселення в Україні, UNFPA Ukraine і Ластради, громадської організації, також ми проводили семінарські заняття і було проведене навчання. Тому я вважаю, що на базі якраз наших співробітників, які вже мають підготовку і досвід спілкування, надання психологічної підтримки, роз'яснювальної роботи, ми якраз можемо і працювати в цьому напрямку, Анастасія, в той лінії, яку ми сподіваємося з вересня місяця стартувати її роботу. Всім дякую і хочу ще раз запевнити, що ми готові долучитися до цієї роботи. Ми готові, як то кажуть, зразу весь свій досвід, який є, вже використовувати. І я сподіваюся, що ми убезпечимо наших дітей від тих проблем, які створюються в мережі, і більш того, надати роз'яснення і психологічну допомогу батькам, вчителям стосовно того, як діяти в таких ситуаціях, коли до них звертається дитина, або якщо не звертається, але вони помітили, що є така проблема. Всім дякую. Налаштовуємося на роботу.
Дуже вам дякую, пані Ольга. Це дуже приємно працювати з колегами, які насправді хочуть тих змін. Я впевнена, що багато з наших учасників вже з вересня зможуть скористуватися цією послугою, зателефонувати до вашого центру, дізнатися більше, як убезпечити своїх дітей, учнів, підопічних від ризиків в інтернеті. Я вам дуже дякую, для нас дуже цінна ця співпраця. Готуємося і вже з вересня починаємо. Зараз хочу передати слово директору Американської асоціації юристів ініціативи з верховенства права або ролі в Україні. Завдяки тієї організації відбуваються наші вебінари, завдяки вашій великій допомозі. Тому, Дмитро Філіпенко, будь ласка, передаю слово вам.
Дякую, Настю. Шановні друзі, радий всіх вітати. Перш за все, хотів би зазначити, що ми дуже пишаємось та вдячні за таку співпрацю та спільну роботу із Міністерством цифрової трансформації, з уповноваженим президента з прав дитини, з урядовим контактним центром. Наразі наша організація, яка працює в Україні з 1996 року і впровадила десятки проєктів міжнародної технічної допомоги, наразі впроваджує проєкт під назвою «Свобода в інтернет». Ціллю цього проєкту є намагання знайти ту межу, яка проходить між національною безпекою та свободою вираження поглядів в інтернет. І розуміючи виклики сьогодення, коли весь світ опинився в онлайн-мережі, це накладає додаткові виклики, в тому числі та свобода вираження поглядів в інтернет, вона з одного боку є демократичною цінністю, а з іншого боку надає більше свобод не дуже, як би то сказати, коректним вираженням поглядів. І всі наші діти, в мене їх троє, опинились під час онлайн навчання з лютого місяця, так само під загрозою тих шалених свобод, які ми зараз бачимо в онлайн-мережі. Отже, ми вирішили за порадою та співпрацею з Миколою Колебою та з Анастасією, ми вирішили провести таку серію круглих столів в онлайні, аби знайти пошук варіантів, як ми можемо завадити тим негативним наслідкам, які ми бачимо з переходом світу в онлайн. Статистика, яку навів Микола Миколайович, вона дійсно жахає. Я не хочу забирати багато часу, адже в нас є два шановних доповідача, які поділяться досвідом, як можна з цим боротись в онлайн-середі. І я дуже радий, що ми долучились до цих заходів. Всіх вітаю і бажаю гарного дня та ефективної роботи. Дякую. Настя. Мікрофон.
Да, є в нас мікрофон. Я вибачаюся, що я інколи відключаюся, бо в нас багато учасників, ми технічно намагаємося зробити цей процес максимально комфортним для всіх. Дуже дякую вам, шановні колеги, за такі добрі слова і промови. Зараз пропоную все ж таки починати. Хочу ще раз нагадати наші правила для учасників. Зараз ми проходимо до англомовної частини нашого заходу. Тому, якщо раптом ви почуєте в навушниках чи в вашому ноутбуці англійську мову, без хвилювань, внизу у вас є такий глобус, нажимаєте переклад, обираєте іспанську мову, і у вас це буде українська. Якщо у вас будуть по ходу виникати запитання, будь ласка, не підіймайте руки, бо ми не зможемо всім просто фізично дати можливість висловитися, бо небагато в нас часу, і в нас дуже багато учасників. Пишіть відразу ваше запитання в чаті, я буду вибирати найбільш цікаві, про які не було сьогодні інформації, і задавати їх спікерам в кінці заходу. Тому, якщо хочете почути відповідь на ваше запитання, залишайтеся до кінця. А зараз хочу передати слово нашому партнеру Венді Робінсон, яка є керівником консультаційної лінії для дітей NSPCC Childline, тобто дитяча лінія. Венді, прошу вас включити відео і показатися нам, і ми зараз спробуємо ще включити презентацію. Венді, чи можете ви мене чути?
Good morning.
Hi, Венді. Окей, я буду говорити українською мовою, щоб всі наші учасники розуміли, що я говорю. Давайте спробуємо вимкнути презентацію.
Please bear with me while I just try and share my screen with you all. Before I do that, I would just like to thank Anastasia for the invitation today. Yeah.
Floor is yours. Yeah, okay.
Okay, hold on. Okay. Do you have it? Can you see my sharing of screen? No? Okay. So, okay. No, we don't see it still. I don't hear you either. You're on mute for me.
Wendy, if you click enable editing at the top there on the little yellow line, and then click F5, it will go full screen.
Okay, I don't see enable.
Same problem. I have the same problem.
I still don't think people can see.
If you click F5 now on your keyboard, it should go full screen.
No, that just did the light and dark. I'm sorry, everyone, to keep you waiting for this.
Up here, along from the save button, there's a little play thing at the top, in the very top left-hand corner. There's a little screen with a play button there. I don't know if that will work.
Now it works. We can start. Thank you so much, Carmel, for your help. And if you have some questions, please add it to question table. So, floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm hopeful today to share with you experiences from Childline. Just to say, first of all, that Anastasia visited Childline last year, and I'm really pleased to see that the developments that she shared with me at that time are moving fast. And we're more than happy to share things with you, to share our learning. First of all, I'll talk a little about the NSPCC, which is our parent organization, then explain what Childline is, what Childline does, hopefully share some practice with you, and the slides will be available for you to peruse at your leisure at a different time. So the NSPCC is an organisation that has existed in the UK for over 100 years. National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. The organisation does a great deal in that field, and Childline is just one part of its work. So you can see from this slide the various things that the organisation tries to do locally and nationally, and then Childline is one of the national service provisions that we offer. So the NSPCC is about 133 years old. Childline is around 34 years old. Childline was launched all those years ago as a very small project in response to child sexual abuse in the UK. It was launched by a famous television presenter who had become concerned about this issue. Really, there wasn't the expectation that many people would call the helpline that was set up. It was just set up for a small period of time, set up by the BBC, and we were overwhelmed by the number of callers, children, young people, and some adults, to share their experiences of child sexual abuse. Since then, Childline has existed and grown into a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service to support children and young people about anything. We like to say Childline is for any child, about anything, at any time. Childline is delivered across 12 bases in the UK, so you can see the map there, and the various places our bases are located. This doesn't mean that when a child calls from London, they may speak to a counsellor in London. Actually, what happens is when a child calls, they speak to the first available counsellor wherever they might be. So regardless where you live, regardless where the counsellor lives, you'll be speaking to someone from Childline. So we pride ourselves on being a place that's just for children and young people. The NSPCC has a helpline for adults, which is where an adult can call when they're concerned about a child, but Childline's very existence is in order to provide somewhere that is entirely for children and young people, that prioritises them, their concerns, and puts them at the centre and at the heart of everything we do. A young person can get information and advice from us on different topics. They can access that either via a website, which has lots of self-help material, message board posts. They can have some peer interaction with other children and young people. They can also contact us and have free confidential counselling session, either via the online system, which would be a live chat, or via the telephone. And as I said already, we aim to be there 24/7. And so a young person is always welcome to call at any hour of the day. On average, a child contacts Childline every 25 seconds. If I give you the example just of 1 year, that turns into 24,000 Childline counselling sessions that were provided for children and young people. Almost 3/4 of our counselling sessions now take place online, something we saw change quite dramatically when we moved our service to not only be via the telephone, but also via an online provision with the live chat, was that demand went much higher. And young people seem to prefer, in many respects now, to contact us online. There is more anonymity for them, possibly. Maybe also they are well versed in living online, and actually typing and receiving counselling through text feels to them quite normal and natural. The top 3 concerns in the most recent year were mental and emotional health, family relationships, and suicidal thoughts and feelings. I'll talk in a little bit more detail of what lies underneath those concerns. Usually when a young person comes to us, they're talking about these issues, but only once we've built the relationship with them and actually give them the opportunity to trust us and to share their concerns, do we get a much fuller picture of what might be contributing to their mental and emotional health issues, the family relationships, or suicidal thoughts and feelings. And these top 3 change and have changed very much over the years. What we can say now for Childline is that in the past, children and young people were contacting us more about things that were happening to them, whereas now when they come to speak with us, quite often what they're talking about is things that are happening inside them. And by that I mean that's where they talk about their anxieties, their mental health problems, and feeling overwhelmed and unable to cope. And it's only when we build that relationship and we get a stronger sense then of what's contributing to that level of distress for the young person. This slide has lots of numbers, lots of data, lots of information. I won't go through all of it for you, but it may be something that's interesting for you to spend some time looking at in your own time. It has the figure that I've mentioned already. Some interesting facts within that I haven't mentioned so far are that Childline counsellors can only respond to 1 in 3 children who need our help. So if you imagine we answered 250,000 contacts, there were many more that we were not able to answer. Something to understand about Childline and the NSPCC is it is a charity. We get very small amounts of funding from the government. It is mostly run on charitable donations, and therefore our resources are limited. We do everything we can within the resources that we have, and one of our greatest resources is our volunteer counsellors. Currently we have 1,484 volunteer counsellors, and they come from all walks of life and give their time in exchange for training from us. They give their time to be there to support children and young people. The figure of 5,676 might be interesting to you because this is the number of counselling sessions that result in a referral to external agencies. Childline offers a very high level of confidentiality to children and young people, but there will be times when if a young person is in particular danger, certainly if that is life-threatening danger, then we will work with them to see if we need to get them either emergency services help or referral into our children's social care or other organisations that might be able to protect them actively at that time. But our very main aim is to work with children, to empower them to get the help that's available, and only when it's absolutely necessary to do so do we take that power away from the child and act on their behalf. Okay, so 74% of our counselling sessions took place online, and 41,000 posts were submitted and published by us on our message boards. That's the online offer for young people, where they can simply express themselves, ask for advice, and also get suggestions from other young people. Again, another slide with lots of information, so I apologize if that's a little bit overwhelming, but I'm sure in your own time you can look at this in more detail. But I wanted to show you the range of issues that young people are bringing to us currently. You can imagine if we open our doors to all young people about any concern, then no surprise that we have such a mix of issues. In terms of your particular topic of interest today, thinking about online safety and the online world, I think there can be an element of that in any of these concerns. If we look at suicidal thoughts or feelings, for example, that might be a young person and that is their primary concern. Things have happened to them that are leading them to feel suicidal. As I said before, once we get to know the young person, we might find out that the reason that they're suicidal is because of something that's happened to them online, a relationship they've got involved in, images they might have shared, images they've shared with a trusted person who has now shared them more widely. There can be a whole range of reasons why that young person is feeling suicidal and as if there's no way out. Bullying at number 4, as you can see. Now that bullying is not only face-to-face, but is also online bullying, and that can be a real issue for children and young people. They can live and exist in a 24-hour world where there is no way to hide at times. If a difficult relationship begins with someone, whether it be a peer, someone in their school or their wider social network, then bullying is online, can happen at any time, and this can prove to be incredibly overwhelming for children and young people. But also the online world and online issues can be there in terms of the friendship issues, sex and relationship matters, also sexual abuse. So I think it's really important that we listen to young people, but we don't assume that their issue will not involve online safety. But let's not also assume that the online safety is only reduced to several issues. As I've said, it could include any one of these, and certainly we find that to be the case when we talk to young people. I'm going to say a little bit more now about who we are, and then a little bit more then about how we do what I've described as being our current service. So who we are in terms of paid staff, I've said that the majority of our counsellors are volunteers. Volunteers are supported though by paid staff. Paid staff are experienced, they're a qualified mix of social workers, therapists, family workers. They are all employed by the NSPCC and on permanent contracts. They're all trained, as well as having the experience that they bring with them in the Childline enhanced counselling model, which I'll go on to describe a little in a moment. They also receive not only in-depth training when they join the service, but also in an ongoing way. Childline is very unique. So many of our staff come having experienced many roles in the wider child protection, child welfare and family welfare field. But Childline in itself is something very specific. And most people find that when they join Childline, it can be like learning a new language. In order to work with a child that's not face-to-face, in order to be responsive across all the issues that the young person will bring, in order to support volunteers and paid staff, to be a national organisation, to be open all the hours that we do. You can imagine that's quite a large piece of work for anyone to take on. And our staff are incredibly dedicated, and we are very keen to ensure that we support them to do this difficult work. I think in order to get things right for children and young people, we need to get things right for those that support them. And for that, our paid staff are the main route into that. Each one of our 12 bases is managed by a service manager and senior supervisors. We have supervisors who run every shift that we have a live shift when we're delivering the counselling sessions. That supervisor is the trained professional who makes the decisions about how we work with that young person and makes the decisions around if we need to take action and refer to other organisations. It's wonderful that we have such dedicated counsellors who are volunteers, but we feel it's also essential that you have paid staff who take the bigger decisions and are responsible for the safeguarding elements of our work. We have regular opportunities for staff in order to meet together and reflect on their work, and also a comprehensive learning and development programme. The service is supported by operational leads. It's difficult for me to describe all the ways that people in the service are working to keep Childline on the road, keep its doors open, keep our work of very high quality. But we have safeguarding leads, volunteering lead, learning and development, as I've mentioned also, and fundraising. And we also have a comprehensive safeguarding audit system. Now, this means that we quality assure the casework with children and young people, because quite often we don't just hear from a young person in a one-off way. We may hear from a young person every day. We may hear from that same young person if they're in a very dangerous or difficult situation. We may hear from them many times in one day. And in that case, what we do is we comprehensively case manage that young person. We create a plan that no matter who that young person talks to, they will be getting a service that's been tailored to their particular need. In terms of our volunteers, as I've already mentioned, we're around 1,500 volunteers, all walks of life, ages and backgrounds. Everyone who is interested comes forward and has a formal interview, much like a job interview. They are then, if successful, trained via 12 modules of our Childline introductory training prior to assessment. If that assessment is passed, then the volunteer moves on to giving their time, which is usually around 4 hours a week. More if possible. We're always keen to have more from our volunteers if they can give it. The more hours they give, the more children we can help. And we ask for our volunteers to give a minimum of 1 year commitment, because it can be quite costly for us to train a volunteer and to support them through their learning journey. So if they're able to give us back a year or maybe more, some of our volunteers stay many, many years, and thankfully, otherwise we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do. The way we support our volunteers is that each shift that we deliver begins and ends with a briefing session and a debriefing time. This is where the volunteer is able to prepare to speak to children and young people. They may have done a full day's work in their other profession, and so when they come into one of our bases, we like to give them time just to settle in, to update them on any of the current issues that might be happening for children and young people. So, for example, today in the UK, teenagers have received their results for very significant exams, their A-level results, and so we are always preparing our counsellors today for many calls from young people who may not be happy with how their exams have gone. So that's an example of how we try and keep up to date with what's happening for children and young people, so that our counsellors are prepared before they go on shift for the kinds of calls they might be getting. And always ends with debrief time. Some of our calls are incredibly upsetting, and the counsellors are trained to hold their emotions, for their own personal emotions, during the work that they do, but they need some time afterwards to talk that through, to share it with colleagues, so that then they can leave that with us and they go back out into their own lives and don't take that distress with them. Our calls from young people who are suicidal can be some of the most distressing, and It's incredibly important to us that volunteers are not burnt out or overly worn out by listening and supporting such high distress young people. So every volunteer also has a personal supervisor. We think about the supervisor almost as a manager, but it's their one person that they can go to, that they can have individual sessions with, and that they make sure that the volunteer's well-being and development is attended to. A volunteer will get mentoring and coaching live on shift, so as they're actually doing the work, they're learning as they go. And we have a varied development program with workshops and training opportunities across a range of topics. So it's always, we're trying to make sure that when that young person does contact us, no matter what issue that they come with, then the counsellor has some knowledge and some information that they're able to share that will be helpful. I've mentioned already the Childline counselling model, so this just really simplifies it. As you can imagine, it's much more detailed than I'm about to show you, but this is just the kind of the headlines. This shows you how we operate and how we try and meet the need of all the children that are contacting us. We would say that it has 3 steps. Step 1 is about engaging the young person and building the relationship with them. We come from an approach that we call child-centered, and this means that we try and tune into the young person's world. We hear things from their point of view. We are non-judgmental, we're encouraging, and we very much stand alongside the young person and encourage them to talk to us about what's going on for them. Once we've built that relationship, then we can start talking with the young person about what it is that brought them to Childline. What is their particular need? It may be something quite immediate, or it may be something that's ongoing for them. For example, if it was a young person that is feeling anxious and depressed and overwhelmed, then we would find out what's been going on for them in their lives to lead them to that. On the other hand, if it's a young person who is in immediate risk, so this might be a young person who is calling us and they're considering or in the steps towards ending their life. We do get calls from children and young people who are at the side of the river or on the top of a bridge and preparing to end their lives. So we have to be really sensitive to find out exactly what's going on for the young person and then tailor our response. So step 3 is, once you've built that relationship and the young person feels that empathy, that warmth, that compassion from the moment their contact is answered, the voice on the other end showing in the simplest ways but the most profound ways that we are there for them, we believe them, we want to hear from them, and when they share what's going on for them, we can tailor our response in order to match that. In our minds, so the way that we train our counsellors to think about, to try and separate out the types of contacts, they tend to fall into 2 separate categories. So one we would call a non-immediate concern, and the next would be an immediate concern. In terms of a non-immediate concern, this might be a young person who just needs to talk. Something's going on for them, they don't feel able to share it with anyone else, and they need someone just as a sounding board to explore how they're feeling about what's happened. But that's enough. It's not that they necessarily need any action, but I like to describe it a little as if the young person enters Childline as if it were coming through a garden gate, and someone's waiting at that gate to find out what they might need. Sometimes the young person simply needs to go for a walk around the garden with that counsellor and talk things through, and then they leave at the same place that they entered, but feeling relieved, feeling supported, feeling a little lighter than when they contacted us. We can get young people, though, who might contact us and there's something very definite going on in their lives and they feel very stuck in it. It could be something that's happening time and time and time again. and that actually emotional support won't be enough in itself, because once they've let go of the feelings around the situation is still continuing. This might be a young person who's maybe engaging in some behaviors that are harmful for them, but they find themselves doing time and time again, and they're stuck. And then we want to be able to work with that young person to help move them on a little bit in the way that might be helpful to move things forward. Sometimes we hear from young people who very much want change. They're very clear about what's going on. They're very clear they want some help with it. This is often the case with a young person who's being bullied. They absolutely know that what's going on for them shouldn't be happening, but they don't know really the way out. But they're very determined. Often we can have a young person that comes with that determination, and if we don't support them effectively in a way to help them look at how they can make some changes, who they can turn to help them, that young person can become someone who becomes stuck. So it's quite an important thing that we work with them to help move them through. In terms of immediate concern, we might have a young person who's in emotional crisis. This might be a young person who's experiencing some kind of serious mental health crisis. It may be a young person for whom their emotions have become overwhelming for them. It may be someone who is simply unable to enter into a conversation about anything until we've supported them to calm their emotions, or to bring them into a state of being able to talk. The other immediate concern would be high risk. Now, this is the young person who is in immediate life-threatening danger, for example, and that we need to then think about taking immediate action. So you can see how it's really important that we identify the need, because if it's a young person who needs immediate action, it wouldn't be helpful for us to spend lots and lots of time talking with them and helping them think about their emotions. Action is needed right now. On the other hand, if someone is in a position where they need to talk, it wouldn't be right for us to take action or act in a more proactive way. So that skill for the counsellor to work out which kind of need it is really does then set the stage for the rest of the work. And here you can see how that then turns out. Emotional support for any child who needs to talk, motivating to change for anyone who's appearing stuck, supporting to make changes if that's what a young person wants, managing feelings and de-escalating the situation if it's an emotional crisis, and safeguarding and possibly working towards a referral for any young person who's in immediate need. Of course, it's not as tidy and neat as my diagram would suggest. So this is a dynamic process, and a young person could start at one place and end up somewhere else. So this is really just about a map for our counsellors to help them navigate what can be quite complex needs that children and young people bring to us. And if we think about it as a cycle and a circle, then we can see that we're not just popping them into one box. We might have to move all the way around that. But underpinning all of it is emotional support and always safeguarding the young person, always listening out for risk to make sure that we're doing all we can to keep them safe. I mentioned already that our confidentiality promise to children and young people is at a very high threshold, and it's incredibly important that we make clear to young people when they contact us what kinds of things they can share with us that we will not need to pass on to anyone else or take action on their behalf around, but what kinds of things may be something we will need to do something with. So when you look under the why we might need to tell someone, this is if they ask us to. So if a young person contacts us, they're being sexually abused, they're in a violent relationship, they're being groomed in some way, and they're asking us to get help for them, then that is immediately what we would do. We would also take action if we believe that their life or someone else's life is in danger. We also take action if we believe, or a young person has shared information that leads us to believe that they're being hurt by someone in a position of trust who has access to other children, for example, a teacher or a police officer. And we also need to take action if a young person tells us that they are seriously harming another person. All of this is delivered in a child-focused way, and this slide here shows you what's on our website, but this is also what we talk through with young people when we're having direct counselling sessions with them. This slide just shows you the kinds of issues that often end up in a referral to external agencies. Now, we will always, as I said right at the beginning, work to get the young person's consent to make those referrals, but there will be times when that might not be possible, and then we would make a referral without their consent. But again, we would usually try and let them know that's what we're doing, unless to tell them would place them in greater danger. But it's always about safeguarding children and young people, but working with them to help keep them safe. There are other parts of Childline that you can find out about for yourselves in your own time. We have our own YouTube channel, which has lots of helpful films across a whole range of pieces of information, not only around what happens when you contact Childline, but we also have lots of information on different topics. And this can be something that young people really enjoy and actually contribute to as well. We have our website, which I've mentioned, has lots of information and advice, toolbox, a calm zone, ways that they can, help them get to sleep at night, various self-help tools and materials. They can also, as I said, leave message board posts. They can get involved. They can leave their comments and suggestions for us. And it's an incredibly interactive website. We have 2 versions, under 12s and over 12s, so that the material is suitable for different age groups. But as you can see, a young person can select these different options for themselves. Also, what we do when a young person is in the queue waiting for live contact, they're also given information about the website so that they can engage themselves and find information out while they're waiting, which sometimes means that then they don't need a contact. But if they still need a contact, at least they've now navigated around the website and they know where they can come back and get self-help material. And these are the message boards, which give you examples of how they work and the kinds of messages that young people place on there. Even those are moderated by our supervisors. So we have a system, because obviously some young people might put information on there which lets us know that they're in danger. So we moderate the posts, and we can contact a young person if we need to get them some help. Just some more pages from the website, so I'm just going to go through them really quickly. This is just for your own interest, so you can see hopefully that Childline is an incredibly comprehensive service. We've grown over the years. I'm just going to finish really with some feedback from young people. So the kind of things that we hear from them. Sometimes we hear from young people many years after they've contacted Childline. Sometimes we hear from them straight away. So you can see there the difference it can make in a child or young person's life. Thank you so much. I'm glad you care. I feel more reassured about what to do next. Thank you for allowing me to share how I'm feeling. So that's the emotional support part that we like to do with young people. I feel like at least here I can get some honest advice, and to be honest, I really felt like I needed to get that off my chest. So I think it's somewhere that we are successful in being there for children and young people. Going forward, we want to be able to reach even more children and young people, so that it's not that 2 out of 3 who contact us are answered, but that we're here for all of them. We still have lots to learn, lots to do. I hope that my presentation and the information we can share with you inspires you in your own practice. And please keep in touch with Childline. We're always welcome. We'll always welcome hearing from you, as well as we do from children and young people. So.
Дуже вам дякую, Венді, дуже надихаюча презентація. Насправді, коли я відвідувала вашу лінію минулого року, мене сильно здивувало, скільки волонтерів приймають участь у вашій гарячій лінії. І те, що якщо волонтер стикається з якоюсь проблемою, на яку він не знає, як відповісти, він може просто підійняти руку, і до нього підійде психолог, який допоможе йому проконсультувати дитину. Тому для мене це був дуже дивовижний та надихаючий досвід. І ще, можливо, один момент, який хотілося б відзначити, це психологічна супервізія і спеціалістів, і волонтерів. Мені здається, це дуже цінний досвід, бо ми не так часто в Україні, на жаль, говоримо про вторинну травматизацію, тобто коли ми травмуємося через те, що ми чуємо чиїсь досвід болю чи пережитих емоцій негативних. І дуже важливо і дуже цінно, що ви даєте таку підтримку вашим співробітникам для того, щоб впоратися з тими складними ситуаціями і важкими ситуаціями, про які вони чують від дітей. Тому для мене це було дуже-дуже надихаюче. Колеги, якщо у вас є запитання, будь ласка, пишіть їх в чаті, ми в кінці зможемо їх задати. Венді, я дуже вам дякую. Хочу зараз передати слово нашому другому спікеру. Тому, Кармель, прошу вас вімкнути відео. Кармель Класбрук, представник гарячої консультаційної лінії для фахівців SWGFL. З Кармел ми також познайомилися минулого року у Великій Британії, коли я відвідувала їх центр. В тій організації є декілька гарячих ліній. Одна з них займається консультацією спеціалістів щодо безпеки дітей в онлайні. Також є гаряча лінія, яка займається видаленням матеріалів сексуального характеру, що були розміщені без погодження людини, яка розміщена на тих матеріалах. Тому хочу передати слово Кармел. І дуже очікуємо вашу презентацію і можемо технічно теж її вмикати. Дякую вам. Так, зараз хвилинку чекаємо технічно, поки воно включиться. Окей. Do you need some help?
Hear me and see me?
We cannot see your presentation.
I'm not sharing screen anymore.
Зараз ми бачимо, але ж також, можливо, треба натиснути, що показ загалом всіх слайдів. Чудово, працює. Yeah, good luck.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you, Wendy, for that really interesting presentation as well. My name is Carmel. I manage the Professionals Online Safety Helpline in the UK, and I'm going to talk to you about that today. So, the helpline is provided by a wider organisation called the UK Safer Internet Centre. That is a charity that's made up of 3 main partners. The lead partner is the Southwest Grid for Learning, and that's where I am based, and that's who provides the helpline. Traditionally, the Southwest Grid for Learning is an organisation that provides internet connections to schools, but in recent years we've started to focus more on online safety as a whole. So as well as providing the Professionals Online Safety Helpline, we also provide a revenge porn helpline for people over 18 who are victims of intimate image abuse. And we also provide a reporting hub online called reportharmfulcontent.com. As well as this, we work within schools, provide training for professionals, and so on. The second organisation is Childline International. So that's a small charity based in London. They provide lots of resources for young people around online safety, and also go into schools and do quite a lot of teaching of young people and professionals. And lastly, the Internet Watch Foundation. Anastasia just mentioned them. So that's the hotline in the UK. And they have the task of removing indecent imagery of children from the internet. So they have the legal clearance to both search for and remove child sexual abuse imagery that is hosted in the UK, and they do a fantastic job. But today we're going to talk about my helpline, the Professionals Online Safety Helpline. We are a helpline purely for people working with children and young people. We're open Monday to Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So who we are and what we do. We and the UK Safer Internet Centre as a whole are part of a European network called InSafe. So we are funded by the European Commission. Now, initially when that funding was tendered, the request was actually for a helpline to support children directly. But as we've just heard from Wendy, in the UK, we already have a really well-established helpline called Childline. When I was in school, everyone knew their number. It was, it's very common knowledge. And so when applying for this funding, it felt that actually if we were to start a helpline purely for children, that we might be kind of confusing matters as Childline already are so well established and known. But what we did notice is that there is a real lack of support for people working with children and young people dealing with online safety issues. You'll find teachers and social workers that have been in the profession for years, very confident in their jobs, but perhaps they're not so familiar with the internet themselves. So when something happens online with the children they're working with, they might not know where to start. And so from that, we created the Professionals Online Safety Helpline instead. So what we do, we do lots, obviously, but we work very closely with our industry partners. So we work very closely with lots of social media platforms. Not only does that give us a really unique insight into their internal policies and how they work, but most importantly, as a function for the helpline, what that relationship does is gives us name contacts within those organisations that we can escalate content to. So if you've ever tried to report something yourself on any of these platforms, you may find that your particular issue doesn't fit their very narrow boxes of issues. And you might think that actually the problem has a lot more context to it, but you can't add that in, and therefore your report may not work. That's where we can step in, and we can email real people, give them the full context of the issue, and let them know why and how it's in breach of their terms and conditions for that content to then be removed. And we're quite successful with that. The last time I ran some statistics on it, 96% of the content that we escalate to our industry partners is then removed. So that's a really unique and wonderful relationship that we have with them. On top of that, we are consulted on in terms of their policies, but then we also consult and can advise quite a lot of other organisations and schools, primarily on policy and procedure and what looks good. But most importantly, the function we fulfil is picking up the phone and offering real-time support to professionals and people working with children and young people. A lot of the time, they just want someone to talk the issue through with, use as a sounding board, and that's exactly what we're there to provide. Okay, so just some quick stats for you, a quick look at the last year, 2019. So we had 844 cases and 1,878 contacts. Now, what we do is when we collect data, we count every individual case that comes to us, and then within that case, we count the contacts to and from ourselves. I can see 2 people have raised their hand. Is everything okay? So what that basically shows, the difference in numbers, is that when we have a case come through to us, it's very rarely resolved with one contact. Usually the cases are fairly complex, and it may take 2 or 3 communications between us and the client in order to find a resolution. Who calls? We are we really promote ourselves to professionals working with children, but of course we do have the odd person call. So 6.7% of our calls last year were from the general public. We don't advertise ourselves that widely, but I think sometimes people just find our information and give us a call. So 3% of our contacts came from the police or the policing family. And 65% of our contacts came from schools and teachers. The majority of our calls and cases do come from schools. Obviously, it's quite easy for us to get our materials into schools in order to market our service, and that is where most children are. So that does make sense. But as well as these three, we do also hear from social workers, youth club leaders, churches. You know, it's a really broad people. We do not advertise ourselves to parents. There are better suited services in the UK, but of course parents do call us. We would never turn someone away, but we may well signpost them to a more relevant service. And just as I was talking about our relationship with industry, while that is a very unique and fantastic thing that we have the ability to do, actually only 30% of our contacts are ever escalated to industry. A lot of the time we are trying to explain policies to our callers and help them understand why something may not be removed and what other steps they can take to find a resolution. And of course, a lot of our calls don't actually involve any piece of online content, but may be discussing a behaviour online or something that may have started online but is now trickling into schools, so bullying, gaming, that sort of thing. Sorry, I'm just going through my things in English as well. So the most reported issues that we deal with are online reputation is always the biggest category of call. When I first started in this role, I assumed that it would all be cyberbullying and grooming, but actually the thing that we hear most about is the online reputation of schools and individual teachers being brought in to distribute online. But I will discuss that further later in the presentation. Potentially harmful content. So this is a very broad category. It could be anything from very violent content or very upsetting content that children come into contact with. Sometimes that might be something like animal abuse, which can really affect a young person. And 11% cyberbullying. So cyberbullying is still very relevant, and we do hear lots about it from young people via the professionals. And just to say on that point that these categories are provided to us by the European network, so we have to record under these categories. And what that does is really allows us to compare issues across the whole network and really learn from each other about what's happening across the whole of Europe and perhaps even globally. We operate our service Monday to Friday from 10 till 4. So in terms of call volumes, we don't necessarily see a spike throughout the day, but throughout the year, you'll find a big difference in levels of calls. So, for example, at the moment, it's the summer holidays in the UK, so our calls have dropped off dramatically, which is good because it means I can do things like this without being interrupted. But we'll also find that we are very busy at the start of term. So when everyone starts coming back to school in September, we'll find our cases will increase quite a lot, and around the Christmas break. So things will happen over the Christmas holidays, and children will then come into school to talk about those. Or more practically, more devices and gifts are given around Christmas, and so we'll have quite a lot of cases and contacts about how to use those safely, how to set the correct safety controls, and so on. So what I'll do now is I'll now go into each of these categories and give you some case studies around them so you can understand them better. So when memes go too far. We're all familiar with meme culture on the internet. It's very big and it can be very funny, but can also cause some kind of real issues. And as well as spread awareness around a lot of things. So for example, last year there was a meme circulating the internet about everyone storming Area 51 in the US in order to find aliens, or I don't really know. And while that was quite funny in some respects, there was a real life impact to that. So there's a very small town near Area 51, and it's the closest town, and it's in the middle of the desert. And there were people in that town that were really, really concerned. This meme was also a Facebook event where 500,000 people, I believe, had clicked attending. Now, that was a really big concern for those people living in that town, because this is, they don't even have a mains water supply. So they were thinking, how are we going to prepare for this many people to arrive? And that was a really big concern for them. They didn't know whether to prepare for 50 people, 500 people, 5,000. There was no kind of guarantee. It's just a silly Facebook event. But ultimately, if lots of people did turn up there, there's a really big concern that they might, not have enough water to supply to everyone to keep them okay. So that's, it can be quite funny, but also have a real life impact for a lot of people. And we see this taking over the internet quite often. Here I've just selected some choice memes which gained a lot of traction on the internet over the year. But how do we see this playing out in schools and amongst young people? We see the funny side. So this is a case a few years ago, but it really displays this quite cleverly. So there was a school whose head teacher, Mr. Green, had implemented a healthy eating plan for the whole school. So over the Christmas break, he had replaced the lunchtime menus with healthier alternatives and removed, vending machines with crisps in and replaced them with fruit and healthy snacks. And while that's obviously a really good thing for young people, they weren't too happy about that, as you can imagine. So they created a Facebook page, and it was called Mr. Green versus Crisps. Now on this page, there was lots of jokes being shared, and people were creating photoshopped images for a joke. But there were images of the head teacher being stuck under an avalanche of crisps, or being chased down the hall by a tube of Pringles, which is a crisp in the UK. All very silly and quite jovial, but frankly the school found it quite disrespectful and felt that it undermined their decisions. Not only that, the page was actually using the school logo and the school name, so there was some concern that other people in the community, the wider community, or parents may think that this was actually a genuine page created by the school. Luckily, we were able to work pretty quickly with Facebook to get that content removed, but also kind of encourage the school to reach out to those children and perhaps use their Photoshop skills for good, and try and encourage that skill in a different way. But we see it becoming quite sinister as well. So it's almost a weekly issue that we see fake accounts being created. These can sometimes be silly, but are often quite sinister. So very often a school will call us and they have found an account on Instagram, usually, that is using their name and logo and may look very legitimate, but is actually being used to share very inappropriate content, pornographic content, or just bullying and name-calling content about other students at the school. That can obviously cause quite a big reputational issue for the school, because the concern is that people will think it's a legitimate page, and that could be very damaging for their reputation online. Second to that, we see within these pages quite a lot of whistleblowing or potential whistleblowing. So it's quite a good and powerful insult to call a teacher a paedophile or to infer that they are inappropriate with children. So we have seen cases where within these pages, teachers are accused of looking up girls' skirts or touching inappropriately and stuff like that. It can become very tricky for us then to help, because while most of the time you can read between the lines and figure out that this is not a genuine concern but is more of an insult, there is that 1 time out of 10 where it may be based in some sort of reality. And so really those sorts of things and those sorts of accusations need to be investigated before we can action any removal. Because if we were to remove something that was a genuine concern, then you could potentially be covering up something very serious. So a lot of schools don't want to hear it when they're calling us about these issues, but we have to advise that they carry out an investigation or ask their local authority to, in order to make sure that that claim is not factual. And once we have that paperwork to say that it isn't, we can kind of contact our industry partner and make them aware and ask for the content to be removed. But in the meantime, this is very damaging for schools and for individual teachers that are being named in this way. As you can imagine, it's quite demoralizing, and some teachers have to be suspended from their role while an investigation takes place. So that can also be a really disappointing thing for them. And photoshopped images. So we've already discussed briefly, but as you can see, that one's quite silly, but yes, it can be very sinister as well. We have had many cases where professionals are photoshopped onto images, either to sexualize them or worse. So we have recently dealt with a case where an image was photoshopped of a male teacher performing a sex act on a young student. It was very clearly photoshopped, but you know, these things are only getting more seamless, and with deep fakes as well. This is a really, really big concern for anyone, but especially for people working with children and young people. Yes, so that's also a really big reputational problem for both schools and their individual staff members. So, potentially harmful content. Like I said, this is a really broad category, and if I'm completely honest, it's not my favourite, because I think that most things could be categorised as this, but I've tried to pull out some of the key issues that we faced in the last year. So we have, we have kind of rogue online safety organisations in the UK that started popping up over the last couple of years. Now, their intention is really good. They want to protect children online, like we all do, but there are certain protocols and procedures in place to make sure that we also do that safely. And there's quite a few organisations now popping up that perhaps don't have those procedures and policies in place. So one that we were dealing with last year what they were doing was going onto apps like TikTok or Instagram, places where there are a lot of young people, and they were trawling these sites, trying to find young children that they thought were under the age of the sign up of the app, so usually 13, and were in some way identified. So primarily looking for children that were in their school uniform or had mentioned in their profile what school they went to or something like that. They were then finding these, screenshotting the evidence, and then contacting the relevant school. So they were contacting the school to say, we found your student online and we believe they're in danger. Can you provide us with the number of the parent so that we can call them and let them know that their child is potentially in danger on this app? Now, most schools had the sense to kind of take a step back, think about this, and perhaps communicate with the child themselves to make sure they were safe. But some other schools were just so scared by this, perhaps didn't think, and actually just provided information to these organisations in order for them to contact their families, the children's families. That's a really big concern because it's a complete breach of GDPR, and don't necessarily know who sat behind these organisations. There's lots of measures and things in place in the UK to protect children in this way. You know, if you go to collect a child from school, you need to be on the list of people that are authorised to do so. You can't just randomly ask for information to do with children, because obviously that could be a really big safeguarding risk. So while these organisations were operating probably with the best intentions, what they were actually doing is making children perhaps a little bit more vulnerable. And also, it's quite scary for them to realise that there are people looking for them, and they might have thought that what they were doing is perfectly safe, and then they're being told that it isn't. So it can be very confusing for young people. Second to this, we have quite a big issue in the UK with these groups that operate on Facebook, and they are paedophile hunter groups. As you can see, this is a screenshot just from my normal Facebook. I've put in the term paedophile hunter, and so many groups have returned, and that list goes on and on and on. So again, these people are operating with the best intention. They do not want paedophiles to be operating online to victimise children. None of us do. But again, there are ways in which we are meant to work safely to do this. We've been contacted by the police on several occasions about these groups, and the police are asking us to contact Facebook to get the content removed. So what these groups will do is they create profiles in the likeness of young girls, maybe 13, 12. They'll use images from the internet and they'll pretend to be a younger girl, basically. They then wait for an older man to talk to them, or they say that they will not initiate a conversation with an older man, but there's, because these are just random people, we don't know necessarily how they're going about their business. So what they'll do then is communicate with the man, and if he begins talking to them sexually, they will arrange to meet up with them. So this, older male thinks he's talking to a young girl, and they're arranging to meet up. The meeting happens, and obviously the older male is confronted by a group of people who have actually been pretending to be this young girl. Often then the interaction is filmed. It's either filmed and uploaded later, but most of the time it's actually live streamed on Facebook at the same time. Now, obviously, the premise of what they're doing is trying to catch paedophiles online, and we can't, really say that's a bad thing. However, the way that they're operating may actually be impeding on current police investigations. The evidence that they gather, because it's so unprofessional, is not often evidence that can stand up in court. And the issues that the police have contacted us about are when the adult male that they are stinging, if you will, is actually someone with severe learning difficulties, or someone that's already known to the police and they're trying to carry out separate investigations. Or most commonly, because the interaction is sometimes filmed outside the perceived perpetrator's house, that perpetrator may well have children living at the property or associated children with them that are now vulnerable to attacks or reprisals throughout the community. So we've seen before where these videos are on the Facebook page and there's lots of comments from users saying things, you know, threats of violence and also about burning people's houses down. Often these are very small communities, so even if the filming isn't taking place outside their house, it may be taking place in a small town where everyone knows each other, and it doesn't take long for someone to identify the person and their address, and therefore there's a serious safeguarding concern. Often the police are trying to work with Facebook to kind of manage the content, but sometimes the requests take a very long time, and actually they find it quicker and more effective if they contact our helpline, because we have that direct route within Facebook to kind of report this to them. And since we started noticing this trend a couple of years ago, we have done some work with Facebook about how they can work to manage this in future. Ultimately, there is a place for these groups on Facebook, but how they operate has to work effectively and without putting anyone else in danger. So, cyberbullying. In the UK, cyberbullying, face-to-face bullying is still more common than cyberbullying. It's been reported. However, I take that stat with a pinch of salt. For children now who've grown up with the internet, their online life is part of their whole life. It's not really separated. I don't love the term cyberbullying because it is just bullying. For a lot of people who spend the majority of their time online, there isn't that much of a difference. However, having said that, the difference with the cyberbullying is that it doesn't stop. If it's face-to-face at school, you may well leave school at the end of the day and you don't have to confront that person anymore. But unfortunately, with the cyber element, they may well take that person home in their phone, and that then your safe place, your place where you feel comfortable, is also the place that you're being bullied. So that can be really damaging for young people. We're very good at working with online platforms to tackle cyberbullying when we see it, but unfortunately, I believe it's not reported as much, and there are probably lots of cases that happen, but we don't hear about it so much. But there are lots of campaigns in the UK to try and tackle that as well. What's next? And that kind of leads me on to my last point, which is not one of the top categories of calls that we get called about, but I think is really important to mention: screen time. In the UK, we talk about screen time a lot. There's new bits of research all the time. If you type screen time into Google and click the news toggle, you'll see lots of articles, most of them recent. We're a little bit obsessed. But a lot of the research and a lot of the talking is about, does the blue light affect you? Is it the content that children are consuming that's a problem? Is it gaming? Is it YouTube? And I feel from what we see on the helpline that this really kind of doesn't tackle the broader issue of screen time, which is a lot of the time neglect. We often see screens being replaced with family time, with parenting, and that's where some of the real damage can come in. So one of the first cases that I dealt with around this was an 8-year-old girl who had been groomed on Skype by an adult male. And this was really, really sad and terrible, but, you know, thankfully after a week or so, she had come to tell her teacher, who got in touch with us. Now, when we looked into the case a little bit deeper, we saw that actually she was 8 years old. She was in her bedroom alone at 10 o'clock at night with a connected device that had no filtering, and was on Skype talking to random people. That's quite sad, but obviously, you know, of course something might go wrong there. And really what we find is that if there are some proper boundaries in place at home, you know, so the internet's turned off at a certain time, or you don't take your devices to bed, some of these issues can be kind of lessened or negated. Obviously perpetrators are still out there, and it's not, you know, it's not the parents' fault, but there are certainly some kind of rules and boundaries that can be put in place in the home that can kind of help with those things. And most importantly, having conversations with your children so that if anything does go wrong, they know who to turn to and what to do next. I think also it's important to say here that during the COVID pandemic, there have been kind of the top categories of calls have not been the same. So we've actually seen a huge increase in calls about technical difficulties. So general queries about how to use Zoom, for example, and GDPR implications with that. So how do you conduct a one-on-one lesson with a child while, you know, having all the safeguarding measures in place, and so on and so forth. We've also seen quite a big increase in hacking. I think possibly because people have a lot more time on their hands to do so. And sorry, just that last image on the screen time slide is about the amount of parental control apps you can now download to help manage children's screen time. Sometimes that's very productive, and sometimes it can actually be quite harmful as well if the parent is being abusive towards the child. Then having one of these kind of apps to control things can be used as a weapon within that as well. So it's swings and roundabouts with that. So other trends we see in the UK, or have seen over the last few years, online challenges, really great way to engage your audience online. So we'll see lots of pop stars and celebrities use challenges to promote their songs or their materials. And that can be really fun, but also to raise awareness for charities. So we had years ago the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge to promote awareness about that particular disease, and that went really viral, and people have kind of clocked onto that. However, it can also be quite sinister. So in the last couple of years, there's been something floating around called the Blue Whale Challenge, which was purportedly a challenge that was encouraging children to self-harm and later commit suicide. So there was a lot of work done around that as well. A lot of the work actually around Blue Whale specifically was about educating professionals about how to talk about it. A lot of people were sharing misinformation, writing letters to parents and children at the school, naming the challenge and saying, don't engage with it. Well, you know, that's like saying, here's a big red button, don't press it. All that did was lead more young people to search for Blue Whale to find out what it was, because it was something that they were not meant to be accessing. So a lot of our own learning and education around online challenges has been more about how professionals should talk about it and how they should deal with these things when they come up. So last year, the Momo challenge came around, and this time I feel that we dealt with it a lot better. Within 1 week, we had about 50 cases relating to Momo. It was very busy, but what we didn't see was it being widely reported in the press, and we didn't see a massive influx of children accessing the inappropriate material. But we did see most of the cases were from professionals saying, we've heard of this thing, what is it, should we tell children about it? Which for us was a real success, actually. What else do we see? A lot of sexting, but also pressures from people to share their images, and so on. Far-right terrorism growing in the UK. We mostly see that coming out of games and chat forums. And technical solutions within schools evolving and developing. So I think back in 2016, I may be wrong, the government put out some new guidance for schools to say they must have an appropriate level of monitoring and filtering. So that now means that schools have to filter out bad content, but also monitor what their students are doing online. This can be a really useful tool to understand issues that may be happening for that young person. So you may see that they are searching for information and advice about child abuse, for example, and therefore be able to go and interact with them and see if they're okay. But it also helps you perhaps learn more about your own school as well. So one of the best examples of using monitoring that we have heard of was in a school in inner city London, where they most of their children, English is not their first language, they're speaking a different language at home. And from their monitoring, they noticed that most children were coming in on Monday and they were typing in their home language. And so what they decided to do was change the whole school timetable so that everyone started Monday morning with an English lesson to get them back into the flow of speaking English and start their week on that level. So that was a very interesting way to use that. Okay, so other resources and places for support that we refer to. We're very lucky to have our own excellent website where we upload lots of resources and information. I'm often asked to write blogs and magazine articles to talk about the issues that we're dealing with on the Helpline. So hopefully professionals are accessing that and learning for themselves, as well as our colleagues and our peers in the field. As well as our own Self-Risk Grid for Learning website, we have the UK Safer Internet Centre website, which is a combined thing of all three organisations holding all of our resources, which is a really useful place for all of professionals, parents, and young people. And the resources that we create. So we have lots of privacy checklists for every social media platform, well, not everyone, but most of them. We create checklists for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Roblox, and TikTok. So these checklists will go through basic privacy settings and just to ensure that people know how to use it appropriately. A lot of the time, children and young people already know this, but they're really useful for professionals to sit down and look through with children and for parents as well. What else do we have? So we have some new resources that we've created over the last year. So one of our very most popular resources is So You've Got Naked Online. This was originally, sorry, did someone say something?
Yeah, I just tell that we don't have a lot of time more. So
I'm finishing now. Yeah. I'm finishing now.
Yeah, thank you.
So You've Got Naked Online is a sexting resource. a lot of the resources in the UK say don't do it, which is absolutely right, but really useless if you've already done it. So this resource is about managing the incident once it's already happened in a very non-judgmental way, and we've recently rewritten that to bring it up to 2020. We also produce podcasts on the website, and most recently have published a resource about pornography online, as we are aware that a lot of children are accessing it. And Report Harmful Content, the new online platform where anyone who uses the internet can report some content and have some help with that. All of these things I will share with Anastasia after the meeting, and so you can have a look at the links yourself and have a look at these resources. Thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry if my dog was barking very loudly then, so I apologise if that interrupted anyone's thoughts. It certainly did mine, but I hope that it was useful for you.
Дуже дякую, Кармель, за дуже цікаву презентацію. Я сподіваюся, що нашим колегам теж було цікаво і корисно все це почути. І в нас є декілька запитань. Я пропоную почати на них відповідати. Якщо раптом нам потрібно буде трошечки більше часу, то я пропоную закінчити тоді о 2:05, щоб ми встигли відповісти на всі запитання. Основні запитання ми отримали від Ольги Холомієвої, директора урядового контакт-центру. Я думаю, що я їх буду поступово задавати, щоб не всі разом. І я б дуже просила Венді включити відео, бо більша частина тих запитань стосується саме вас, Венді. Я думаю, що ви зможете на них відповісти. І перше запитання, якими нормативно-правовими актами регулюється діяльність дитячої гарячої лінії? Тобто, як юридично вона врегульована у Великій Британії?
If you're referring to our own internal policies, then yes, we have many of those. Do you mean more kind of statutory legal obligations?
Ольга, можливо, ви могли б пояснити, що саме нас цікавить найбільше, щоб Венді могла відповісти саме так?
Так, мене цікавить саме акти законодавства. Бо лінія, яка працює вже понад 100 років, то мають бути якісь, як то кажуть, залізобетонні підстави для її існування. Мені дуже цікаво, які саме законодавчі акти були покладені у основу існування цієї лінії. Дякую.
Well, the NSPCC has been around for over 100 years. Childline has only been in existence for 33 years. We have the Children Act in the UK, which is actually our founding, all the work that is done towards safeguarding children and young people is based on that legislation, which has been around for possibly the same amount of time as Childline.
Ольга, скажіть, будь ласка, чи відповіли ми на ваше запитання, чи треба ще додати уточнення? І тоді, можливо, я вам передам слово і до наступних запитань, щоб ви всі могли озвучити.
Дякую за відповідь. Я сподіваюся, що в нас теж будуть такі прийняті закони, які убезпечать наших дітей від всіх небезпек, не тільки в кіберпросторі, і всі вони будуть адаптовані. Ну, можливо, потрібно імплементувати ті закони, які вже існують в Британії, наприклад, до наших реалій і взяти їх за основу в нашій роботі. Дякую. Наступне питання тоді я озвучу. Чи не виникало претензій з боку батьків стосовно спілкування малолітніх дітей без участі батьків чи їх опікунів? Бо всі ми знаємо, що малолітні діти мають спілкуватися виключно за участю батьків, опікунів або адвокатів, наприклад. Коли малолітня дитина звертається на гарячу лінію, чи не виникало потім у батьків претензій до гарячої лінії, до співробітників гарячої лінії?
Sometimes parents will contact with these questions, but usually, because Childline is very well known, very well respected, also the same for the NSPCC, it is part of the fabric of British life. In general, the majority of parents are pleased that the organisation exists and that we can provide support and guidance for children. We don't take on legal cases against parents, or our work is entirely around safeguarding children and young people, and mostly parents are grateful for that.
Дякую за відповідь, Венді. Ну, цікаво було б таки перечитати ваше законодавство в українському перекладі, для того, щоб знайти, мабуть, що всі відповіді на свої питання саме там. Ще в мене питання стосовно роботи волонтерів, і саме яким чином, ну, я думаю, що, скоріше всього, укладається якась угода про нерозголошення тієї конфіденційної інформації, яку вони отримують під час спілкування в гарячій лінії. Да? Все зрозуміло по вашій реакції. Так. І які дії приймаються керівництвом гарячої лінії в разі, якщо таки витік такої інформації стався? Які дії ви приймаєте?
Okay, something also to say about paid staff and volunteers. Everyone has to undertake what we call a DBS check, which is where this is a check for any information of legal, I don't know how to describe it really. Anyone can help me? DBS, what does it even stand for? So if there is, what's that?
I was just going to say, just to check for your criminal record to make
there
sure.
You go. Yeah. So we do a criminal records check for everyone, and if there is anything on there that gives us information that this is someone who's been involved in any kind of criminal activity, then that would be a no from the immediately. A confidentiality policy is really tight for both staff and volunteers, and if there was any breach in that, then that would be a serious matter. And usually in all of our years with volunteers, because we have very stringent checks and interview process and 12 weeks of training, mentoring, assessment, lots of processes that actually mean that when that volunteer is actually speaking to a young person, they've been through a great long process that helps us be confident that that person is going to act within our values and behaviors. But of course, if there was an opportunity for someone to break confidentiality, then we would act very swiftly and seriously.
Дуже вам дякую, Венді, за відповідь. Ольга, скажіть, будь ласка, чи на все відповіли, які у вас були запитання?
Так, дякую за відповіді і також дякую всім учасникам за дуже цікаві презентації. Буде час переглянути більш докладно їх і використовувати і в нашій майбутній роботі. Ну і, як то кажуть, знаєте, для общого розвиття.
Дякую вам дуже.
Теж дуже корисно. Дякую.
Да, ми ще не закінчуємо, в нас ще є декілька запитань, але ж перед тим ми хочемо все ж таки зробити маленьке опитування, про яке я на початку зазначала. Зараз на вашому екрані ви побачите запитання, на яку оцінку ви оцінюєте ваш рівень знань до цього вебінару з цієї теми, з консультаційних послуг для дітей, батьків та спеціалістів щодо безпеки дітей в онлайні. Будь ласка, оцініть на певну цифру, де 1 – це мінімальний рівень, а 5 – це максимальний рівень, що ви можете самі проводити таке консультування. Зараз ми трошки почекаємо, поки всі відповідять на це запитання. Так, маємо 19%. Давайте почекаємо хоча б, щоб половина в нас відповіла. Тобто 1 – це мінімальний рівень, 5 – це максимальний рівень, коли ви самі можете проводити таке консультування. Так, бачимо, що в нас переважають 3 і 4, змінюються ці цифри. Чекаємо ще декілька секунд на ваші відповіді. І будемо переходити до другого запитання. Так, є 48% ми отримали відповіді і бачимо, що середній рівень, а це 3, тобто середній рівень знань. Дякую вам дуже. Анастасія, можете нам, будь ласка, показати друге запитання? Так, тут ми бачимо відповіді. І на яку цифру ви оцінюєте ваші зараз знання після відвідування цього вебінару? Ну і знову ж таки, 1 – це мінімальний рівень, 5 – це максимальний рівень. Тобто відносно того, який у вас був до того. Давайте почекаємо хоча б теж приблизно 50%, щоб ми могли порівняти з тими людьми, які на початку відповідали на перше запитання. Бачимо 4 практично всіх. Я дуже рада, що рівень знань він зріс. Бо на початку це було 3, це дуже приємно, і це велика подяка нашим спікерам Кармель і Венді за те, що вони поділилися з нами корисною інформацією. Окей, пропоную тоді закінчити цим запитанням. І є ще в нас одне запитання, яке я хотіла подресувати Кармель. Нас дуже часто питають щодо поширення фото і відео дітей. Зараз якраз нас очікує початок вересня, сподіваємося, що наші діти підуть в школу. Могли б ви трошечки більше розповісти про політики поширення фото чи відео із зображенням дітей? Чи берете ви в батьків згоду, яким чином це все оформлюється і як регулюється на законодавчому рівні?
Yes, so I'm not sure that there is official legislation on this because every school and establishment is different, but it is best practice in the UK to obtain consent from parents to share images of their children. Some children may be under protection orders and may need to keep their identity fairly secret or private. So absolutely, there's quite a lot of schools in the UK that employ a sticker system. So if you are at a sports day or something where there may be an official photographer taking lots of pictures, the children that don't have consent to have their image taken and shared will wear a sticker, and therefore the photographer will know not to take a picture of them. But also there is even if you do have consent from a parent to share an image of a child, you would never share the image with their full name. For example, you would only share it with part their name or just their first name in order to offer them a bit more privacy.
Дуже вам дякую, дуже цікава практика. Колеги, бачу, що в нас вже час закінчується, тому хочу зробити, мабуть, маленьке оголошення, ми з вами будемо прощатися. Я сподіваюся, що для вас дуже цікава і корисна була наша сьогоднішня зустріч. Впевнена, що це наша не остання зустріч. Після цього заходу ми надішлемо вам лист, в якому ви побачите презентації наших спікерів, і також колеги, які не змогли приєднатися до нас сьогодні, згодом отримують відеозапис цієї зустрічі. Також 25 серпня в нас відбудеться ще один круглий стіл, який буде присвячений освітянам. Будемо говорити про освітні програми в школах та навчання вчителів щодо безпеки в онлайні. А 26 серпня в нас відбудеться круглий стіл для працівників соціальної сфери, тобто представників служб у справах дітей, в першу чергу і соціальних служб. Будемо говорити про консультування і реабілітацію дітей, які постраждали від сексуального насильства в інтернеті, тому що теж слідкуйте за інформацією на сторінках Уповноваженого президента України з прав дитини, стоп-секстинг громадської організації і також Абаролі. Ця вся інформація там і форми будуть викладені. Якщо у вас залишилися якісь запитання, на які ми сьогодні не відповіли, будь ласка, надсилайте їх у відповідь на лист, який ми вам сьогодні надішлемо. І якщо у вас є якісь позитивні враження, чи негативні, чи коментарі щодо сьогоднішнього заходу, теж, будь ласка, пишіть нам у листі. Зі свого боку, я хочу вам дуже подякувати за активну участь і хочу надати по одній хвилинки прощального такого слова нашим колегам Ольгі Холомеєвій і потім нашим спікерам. Дякую вам. Ольга, ви до нас приєднаєтеся до прощального слова?
Так, звісно. Дякую всім учасникам цього круглого столу. Дійсно було цікаво почути, яким чином працюють такі лінії, вже створені, тим більше, що протягом такого довгого часу, як то кажуть, даний такий поштовх для того, щоб налаштувати і нашу роботу в правильному напрямку. І я думаю, що все в нас вдасться, Анастасія, і дуже чекаю наступних круглих столів, бо хочу дійсно прийняти участь і в наступних 2 локаціях, як то кажуть, для того, щоб послухати, яким чином буде надаватися інформація і для вчителів для навчання, і для соціальних працівників, бо вся ця історія, як то кажуть, буде мати продовження і в питаннях на нашу лінію, яку ми з вами сподіваємося запустити вже в вересні.
Це точно. Дуже вам дякую.
Дякую всім учасникам.
Да, передаємо слово тоді Венді, і потім Кармель, будь ласка, і будемо вже розходитися потрошки. Дякую вам.
Thank you for having me and for showing your interest in the work that we do. I'm really supportive of the developments that you will make, and please feel free to come back to us at Childline if we can support you in any more way, maybe to share with you some more kind of the detail of our counselling model, the training that we do. Would love to share that with you as much as we can. So good luck. Thank you.
That's me. Yep, I echo all those comments. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. I'm really excited to see the work that you're developing in the Ukraine and hope that I can help as much as possible and contribute to that. Anastasia will also be able to share my email address, and if you do have any further questions or would like another call about anything that I've talked about, please do reach out and let me know. It's just myself and one other part-time colleague on the helpline, so I might not respond straight away, but I'll do my best to keep in touch as much as possible. Thank you.
Дуже вам дякую. Тоді пропоную нам вже розходитися і продовжувати нашу роботу. І з нетерпінням чекаємо запуску лінії. Сподіваюся, що для всіх учасників, які сьогодні з нами були, вона буде корисною і допоможе вам в вашій роботі. Дуже вам дякую і до нових зустрічей.